We come to the 24th presentation in this year, and during each of these year-long series of presentations, 52, you get something that's 4 times the size of the prize 13-part television series like Civilization, The Ascent of Man, Cosmos, the New Cosmos series, and the program that I worked on for almost half a century, The Learning Civilization, is 2 full years. And not just 45, 50-minute programs, but 90-minute programs, more or less. So that the Learning Civilization program that is now ready on NISA's incredible app is 4 times the size of those 4 series put together. Civilization by Kenneth Clark, Lord Clark as he often preferred to be addressed. That 13-part series ran a total of 640 minutes and was a colossal, epic release when it came out in 1969. The Learning Civilization is 9,360 minutes long. We're coming in this presentation to put a little perspective on the scalar of what is being done here and why it is that since the giving of the Learning Civilization double year in 2006 and 2007, starting in 2008, the last 6 years have been an exercise in pushing forward and outward, upwards and onwards, as my friend Theodore Sturgeon used to have as his motto, that this is expandable in this scalar to something truly amazing and astounding. Among the things that we're going to take a look at today are a couple of incredible women whose work in the tree was seminal in what it is that we're exploring, but as a sort of a appetizer, a prelude, I want to come to this volume. It originally was a paperback copy, my copy of the great novel by Hermann Hesse called The Glass Bead Game, in German Das Glasperlenspiel. And it was bound by a young Japanese student of mine in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. She was taking a book binding class, and she said, "Do you have something favorite that I could bind for you?" And so I chose it, and this is her wonderful job of binding. It's interesting because Das Glasperlenspiel, the Glass Bead Game, was a monumental book that when it was published first in its entirety in a 2-volume set in 1945, it literally dwarfed a lot of competition by world-class items that came out in 1945. And he was the next year in 1946 awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Building up to the Glass Bead Game, which is so epical, coming out coinciding with the detonation of the atomic bomb, which was so devastatingly ripping the entire fabric of mankind's heritage. One of the most poignant figures of the day, writing just even still in exile in the Gobi Desert of China, having been exiled there for almost 40 years by the Roman Catholic Church, was Teilhard de Chardin, who had given a mass to a couple of British soldiers in a foxhole in World War I. And they asked for a mass, and he said, I have nothing to offer for the mass. And then he had the insight that he would offer the entire world. And for this, when the report got to the papal censors, they exiled him to the Gobi Desert to become a paleontologist and to deal with rocks and fossils for the rest of his life so that no one would hear him. In 1945, he wrote an incredible short essay, Spiritual Repercussions of the Atomic Bomb. And as an echo to that, A.E. Van Vogt published, even in the month, August 1945, the beginning of his great novel, The World of Null A, the world of non-Aristotelian thought, in the then very famous science fiction magazine, Astounding Science Fiction. It was Hesse who prepared from World War I to the conclusion of World War II the experience of a German language visionary to try, from his Swiss residence of being safe in Switzerland, yet being German speaking and being touted as being one of the most famous and creative of all the authors in the German language in that part of the 20th century, that he went to India to try to season himself to a broader quality of humanity, and decided to take as a theme person for a short novel which he wrote and which sold like crazy. I think it was 1921, called Siddhartha, which is the personal name of the Buddha, the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. Then he realized that that was only half of what humanity had experienced, and that World War I had brought rushing back to the surface, that there was a whole other way, other than the calm analytic of the Buddha. There was the ferocious cascade, swirling maelstrom. And so he wrote to go as the pair, the symmetry, the exact opposite of Siddhartha, Steppenwolf, about someone who is alienated from everything, including himself, who in his wanderings in Steppenwolf comes to a desolate, lonely, macabre, surreal alleyway, and there is a sign of a theater with performances with the warning, "For madmen only." Then, having written Steppenwolf and Siddhartha as this clashing pair, both of them read by millions at the time, he decided to put the two of them in some sort of equilibrium that could be dealt with, and he wrote a third called Narcissus and Gulben. But it was not satisfactory at all, because it was like a dead even limbo that doesn't go anywhere. And that's when the theme of the glass bead game rushed up into his creative milieu. In the foreword to the English translation, done by Mervyn Seville, whose translation I had in the paper, large paperback edition. Finally, we arrive by a logical progression at Hesse's most substantial work, Das Glasperlenspiel, that superb philosophical romance, which, ably translated by my friend, Mervyn Seville, it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce to English-speaking readers. This book, first published in its entirety in 1945, represents an attempt on the author's part to formulate an ideal design for living. Whilst he indulges in neither the Gallic fantastification nor the macabre inventions, Hesse takes us, as some have done in shorter tales, into a future where a very different order of society from our own obtains. You talk about a new world order? This was it, at the birth of the atomic bomb. He invents and describes in fascinating detail an aristocratic hierarchy of intellectuals who form the so-called Castilian order, in which is incorporated the faculty of the Glasperlenspieler, a beautiful German word, the full quality of which the literal English translation, bead players, fails to convey. Members of the order must seek to coordinate all the arts and sciences into a whole which transcends the sum of the constituent parts. Something akin to what Robert Bridges, I presume, had in mind when in The Testament of Beauty he wrote, "The accord of sense, instinct, reason, and spirit." For those who attain to proficiency in the Glasperlenspiel is raised to the level of a mystic rite, in which acutest mental awareness is coupled with a yoga-like discipline of meditation. Music, in particular the pure music of Bach, and mathematics are the foundations, stones upon which the whole complicated structure is erected. The book is a tour de force in which vision is offset by meticulous analysis, fantasy balanced by sound argument, yet here the antinomy between Siddhartha and Steppenwolf is not resolved. It is brought to a boiling over point. And it takes the course of this epic novel to disclose through the literary experience of the readers, of which at that time the world was tuned to receive something that one could understand what has happened. The most famous phrase from Oppenheimer, Robert J. Oppenheimer, as the first atomic bomb in the test site at Trinity site in northern New Mexico went off, he quoted from a translation of the Bhagavad Gita that the destroyer of worlds has come, is set loose. A genie of immense power, which, to keep it from being evil, is going to take everything that is possible, because it cannot be put back in the bottle. While Hesse was getting his derivation of insight from India, beginning with Siddhartha, many other German language persons of that ilk, of that level, were looking at the sudden realization that civilization had been torn up. It wasn't just that it had been trampled on and discarded in the First World War, or that it had been nightmarish in the Second World War, but that the conclusion of the Second World War was an impossibility for civilization to continue. It would never be the same again. You cannot put the genie back in the bottle. One of the responses to this, on the political level, on the international level, was to revive the League of Nations idea of Woodrow Wilson that he proposed during the First World War. Let's bring it back and refurbish it. Let's make the United Nations. And in San Francisco, this idea was finally seen that we are at a juncture. We have crossed a threshold. We cannot go back. We cannot continue in this way. Something new on this scalar must be done, and now, and in a hurry. One of the great German language geniuses at the time was Heinrich Zimmer, whose father was a famous scholar, and Zimmer looked to India to be a balancing resource for the European emphasis on itself, both in excellence and arrogance, and published eventually a number of books on India. In fact, he was so influential that another German-speaking Swiss, Carl Jung, who received incredible funding from Andrew and Mary Mellon, the funds to make a whole series of books that would come out. It was structured so that the first volume came out in 1943. It was called the Bollingen series, named for Carl Jung's tower home, Bollingen, on Lake Zurich, outside of Zurich, Switzerland. And Heinrich Zimmer's books were all published in the Bollingen series. The first one was a collection of wisdom, insights into civilization and its problems. And among them were wisdom tales. One of them was Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. One of them was on an ancient India wisdom little work, in translation in English, called The King and the Corpse. And it was so influential that another contemporary of Hermann Hesse, Thomas Mann, on the level of Hesse, Nobel Prize winner in 1927 for The Magic Mountain, wrote a short little novel on the way in which two heads have to be exchanged in order for there to be a resolution to something that is so nightmarish that it cannot be forgotten, it cannot be righted, it cannot be dealt with. It can only be resolved, as the word is expanded to a solution that is expanded to an alchemy that is lifted to a spiritual, high conscious level. The tale is about a young prince in a cemetery where all of the ghastly things are happening. Not just the burying of the dead, but the burning of bodies, the corroding of bodies, and the death of everyone. And there's this magician who draws a circle and says, I can help you if you will do this simple task. There is a corpse. That's why it's called The King and the Corpse, because the young prince is just about to become the king. If you will cut down that corpse and bring it here and place it in my circle before me, I will be able to show you the way out. And each time as he does and cuts the corpse down, and the young king comes towards the magician and he puts it down, the magician says, now, if you are unable to answer my question to you, your head will explode and you will die instantly with your brains blasted here and now. And the young king steels himself, which is a mild word to say what he did, and refuses to answer. Immediately the corpse goes back, hanging on the tree. And again the magician says, you must cut him down and bring the corpse here and dump it into my circle, and then I will reveal to you. And this happens several times until finally the young king refuses to accept the question, refuses to entertain the riddle. And in a poof of vapor, the magician vanishes, and the quiet of a cemetery shows the actual situation. The Tale of the Two Heads by Thomas Mann, the essay by Heinrich Zimmer, who's one of his great books. I read it when I was 19, Six Philosophies of India, and Hermann Hesse. All of this, just in the German language, just in the space of a couple of decades, is the proofing of the fact that we are now, by 2014, deeper into the 21st century. The situation is exacerbated not only 1,000-fold, but 1 trillion-fold. So what we are doing here in 2014, June, almost to the next presentation, 25, will be on the Summer Solstice, one of the great holidays of the world, especially in civilization. Been a special festival day for me for many, many decades. Our situation is such that all of what has been tendered as the situation is erroneous and corrupted. The insolubility, the impossibility of the situation, the nightmarishness, the surreality of our condition is due to a massive, entrenched, long-promoted confusion and corruption that especially has been the infection of civilization since it became formalized about 4350 BC, 6,350 years ago, 64 years ago, by the establishment of a written language, taking the written form of expressing what only had been oral understanding of life, speech, the speaking, the ability to speak and have wisdom, have society, have life on all levels, not just as individuals. Usually in oral cultures, individuality would be an abstract thing. It's the participation with those around you, friends, family, generations, ancestors, descendants, spirits, the whole thing. The experience of being able to write a discursive language, to make that transform out of speech, is a very peculiar, feminine gift. It's as simple as when women get together, what do? They talk. They are wonderfully always able to bring speech. In fact, one of the great studies of the core of Indian civilization, Vak, the concept of the word in selected Hindu tantras, but speech is a goddess. And that goddess is able to make that transform to written language, to readable language that is writable. And one of the deepest mythological themes about this is Eve in the Garden of Eden is the one who eats the apple from the tree of knowledge and shares it with her husband, her companion, Adam. It is the gift of Sophia, wisdom, of Athena, of the quality of the goddess being able to make the brilliance of life-givingness carry over in the transform to a written language, which is a readable language, which then becomes able to bring a new quality into human communication. It is able, for the first time, to emphasize not the mythic tones, but the poetic temperament. But what comes along with the poetic is the rhetoric. And for the masculine quality, for the males, the reading and the writing connotates, in a male way, the rhetorical. That it should make sense. That it should have an order. That it should be able to be planned for, laws, rules, etc. And this is the way we do it and do it right. A poetic is different. A poetic is that quality of wisdom that is able to infuse and suffuse so that the confuse is cleared up. The fog, which the rhetorician seeks to eliminate, not by dealing with the fog, but by obviating the source of the fog. If we get rid of the conditions that make this, we won't have it. So this masculine super control, that this is how we're going to solve this. And the solution following 1945 was a scramble to have atomic bomb energy secure in the American military, with the Russian military rushing pell-mell to get the secrets of the atomic bomb. And by 1949, they had them and had their own atomic bomb. So that immediately there was a broken quality that for 5 years in the late 1940s, the United States as a military power was non-parallel in the world. All of a sudden there were two. But two instantly, because nuclear bombs are not something that you can have. You can't begin and just have it occasionally. It has the capacity to have a nightmare, sudden, instant escalation to oblivion. Nada, nil, zip, as the phrase used to be in one of the tirades in the 60s in San Francisco. There will be nothing left. Any survivors will envy the dead. There'll be monsters of every description, everywhere, of every kind. You can look at the science fiction magazines from the 30s and 40s especially, and into the 50s, and you can see the proliferation. It's not only the bug-eyed monsters, but the fact that they always threaten the feminine. There's always a beautiful girl, an attractive woman, threatened, not just to have something abruptly offensive said, and not just a violent, horrific, shattering rape, but a rape of the entire life, of the entire species. No more love, no more children, no more home, no more birth, no more life. Those bug-eyed monsters are, in fact, the living demons of the atomic bomb, and much stronger than the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer refused to work on the atom bomb. So Edward Teller, who was working on the hydrogen bomb, had him undercut, and finally, with Senator Joseph McCarthy, his hometown was Tomahawk, Wisconsin, chop him down in front of the world at Senate hearings, un-American activities, and have his security clearance revoked permanently. The atomic bombs measured their power in tens of thousands of tons of TNT. The first primitive hydrogen bomb was 1,000,000 tons. And finally, they're called megatons. Hydrogen bombs became 50 megaton. The one at Eniwetok Atoll in the Pacific evaporated the entire atoll and everything in the seabed. All the ships that were afloat, they were not just destroyed, they were evaporated. We now live a half a century later, and the capacity is to evaporate the planet. We cannot any longer not learn. It's as simple as that. When we come back from a break, we'll take a look at something which we are doing in a time-honored way to comb through the corrupted, disruptive past into a new past, which at the very same time opens up the future. The future and the new past are chirally, spirally, double spirally, like double helix of life. This is how civilization not only continues, but occurs in its reality for the first time. One of the greatest science fiction authors from the Golden Age, Robert Heinlein, in the early 1940s, under the editor of Astounding Science Fiction, wrote a whole outline of future history, and then he would write all the short stories and novels that would fill out the future history. In the future history of Heinlein, 1941, the first mature civilization would be 2075. Let's take a little break. Let's come back to understanding what we're doing and why and how. Revolutions do not work. Reformations do not work. There are counter-revolutions endemically because it's a part of the structure. There are counter-reformations for the exact same reason. When you're dealing with a mirror mind, you're going to get reflections. Because it's the mirror mind that makes those reflections, because that's the way it thinks it sees. Most holy events require, regardless of what religion, sect, etc., sectless, religionless, for those who are going to do this to purify themselves before doing it. And to not be so overly concerned with purifying the ritual ahead of time. That if you are prepared in the sense that you are open, because that's the only purification there is, what you actually do then is holy. It's true in nature, it's true in consciousness. It's very true in nature, it's high truth in consciousness. We're looking at currently how at this juncture of 2014 in the 21st century, a great culminating excellence is occurring everywhere on the planet And we're looking at one of the, not the slices of the pie, not the wedges of the culture or the civilization, but taking as a springboard for ourselves today, here returning after the first half on the tremendous influence that India had on the German language people especially of the First World War, the between wars, the Threepenny Opera by Kurt Weill, etc., Metropolis, Franz Lang, the Second World War, the atomic bomb age, etc., even until now, that India itself, the mathematical term would be recursion, the recursive quality that it not only affects those people, but those who affect those people are also affected. There's a quality in geology where the intrusion into a matrix, feldspar, whatever it is, changes the way in which the geology of that strata will be, but it also changes the chemical composition, the atomic structure of the infusion itself. And so you get rare minerals, rare alloys that are possible. And they traditionally in wisdom are alive, just like plants and animals and men. Minerals are alive. Metals are alive in just that way. To not know this is to believe in dead matter. There's no such thing as dead matter. What time do you think it is that there could be dead matter? Even in the most perfect vacuum of intergalactic space, there are atoms of gas, subatomic particles, photons, neutrinos, etc. It's a blizzard of happening. The only thing dead is the zombies who do not know this, who do not see this, who do not hear this, who do not live this. They are dead. It's time to stop obeying the false magicians who want us to cut the dead seeming down from their being hung in the cemeteries and brought so that they can be alleviated and freed from the cemetery, from those things, and given these secret riddles that if they can't respond, won't respond especially, their head will explode. Let's look at India, as we're doing. Usually with the notes that are brought into play. There is a series of illustrations that I bring into play. And 3 of these illustrations are of an Indian woman. Her name was Vimala Thakar. She was born in 1921, about the time that Hermann Hesse was writing Siddhartha and publishing it. And she died in 2009, just less than a handful of years ago. She was a black woman. There are black women in Africa by the hundreds of millions. There are black women in India by the hundreds of millions. There are black women in Australia, in New Guinea, in many parts of the world, the Caribbean, the United States, etc., Europe, etc. About 1 billion black women in humanity. Vimla was an extraordinary youngster. She was born in the middle of the great Deccan desert that is a part of the middle of India. And she went to Nagpur University. Nagpur is a very big, traditional, ancient, powerful city of the Deccan. My teacher of the Bhagavad Gita to me personally was from Nagpur. He was a soil agronomist, a soil engineer, Mr. Sudarshan Puri. I was 20 years old. He got me to read Heinrich Zimmer's Philosophies of India. After I had read the Bhagavad Gita, after I had heard from him the Bhagavad Gita, so I knew how to learn to begin. She matured out of Nagpur University by joining with Vinoba Bhave, the successor to Gandhi. And when she had worked with the social philosophy called in India, in Sanskrit, Sarvodaya. Sarvodaya is the service of all, a social ordering that is not communist, it's not capitalist, it's a third power. And she worked for decades with Vinoba, and we'll talk more about it. She has a bunch of little books that come out, maybe several dozens, scores. Here's some poems. Friendly Communion. But she's especially famous for little books beyond awareness. Because in addition to having the communal work of Sarvodaya with Vinoba for many, many years, she chanced upon a lecture in India by Krishnamurti. So when she realized that there is a waking that gives a fertility and a fructification to all of the social philosophy, that raises it so that it now becomes something more than just universal good works. She joined the Krishnamurti way of traveling the world and all over India for the rest of her life. She lived to be 88 years old. And if you look up Vimla Thakar, you're likely to come across a picture of her looking beautiful in what used to be called an angelic sort of way, deep, wise woman. And it reads underneath, the Indian spiritual master Vimala Thakar, in India she's called Vimalaji, J-I-G as respect, Gandhi, Gandhiji, Vinoba, Vinobi, Baji. The Indian spiritual master Vimala Thakar, whom we featured in our fall-winter 1996 issue of the magazine What is Enlightenment, is best known in Europe and the US as a strikingly independent and powerful teacher of spiritual awakening. Indeed, we at What is Enlightenment believe that she is perhaps the most enlightened woman in the world today. She came by invitation to the Los Angeles area in the 1970s. She went to Claremont colleges in Pomona and addressed many people there. Her books include this one. Its title is Silence in Action. From Intellect to Intelligence. Just simply talks. Blossoms of Friendship. And a very, very great book. Its title is Life as Yoga. I used to use the term for my learning as the yoga of civilization, a Maharaja yoga, which it is. Because it has its heritage, lineage, if you like to begin, but heritage is more comprehensive than a lineage. Going back before there was a written language, when wisdom was a spoken language, that one would go, and the saying becomes proverbial, one would sit at the feet those hearable words and language, when written down, are called Upanishads. Shad, sat, means seat, set. Upani, at the feet of, in an open way. When one is there, what occurs is a quality that is best in the English word expressed as beholding. In birth, as in love, there are knees that hold. In wisdom, there are knees in which beholding occurs, because it is shareable. Not only those beholding, but whoever is being beheld is also beholding at the same time, and there is a sharedness. And that sharedness is beholding raised to its radiance, which is presence. In the ancient biblical heritage, very early on it was called the angel of the presence. There comes a day where all present themselves before God. And the interface between those presenting themselves and God is the angel of the presence. Not a director, not an interlocutor. A facilitator with a big, big neon sign, facilitator. That the sharedness of beholding and beholder means that not only are we in the presence, but God is in presence also. There is a simultaneousness which has no time, and thus it is before spontaneity comes into play as time, and then time comes into play as blossoming as space, and space-time blossoms into particality. Out of the energy wave comes the integral of the particality, and the whole integral universe occurs in this dance. There is a deep resonance called harmonic, which is able to have a two-handed prayer, a gasho, an openness. That is the most ancient asana for it. That is the beholding raised to a sharing, creating presence. There, the language that comes out is a poetic, spontaneously a poetic. So that when civilization ever reached a node of an apex of excellence, emerging qualities that had come to that particular mounded axial eminence, there you will find a poetic that is capable of being written and read in civilization. And it's feminine. The first exemplar of that, 4,350 years ago, was Enneduanna, the end priestess in the great Sumerian city of Ur, under her father as the king, Sargon, establishing Akkad as being the transform of ancient Sumeria into Akkadia. And the language of Akkadia is the subject of another wise woman's recent book, Malati Shenge, who also is from the Deccan in southern India. And among her books, The Language of the Harappans, ancient Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, the original Indus civilization, from Akkadian to Sanskrit. And her books are almost not read at all, and yet there is a beautiful quality of harmonic. Just like Vimala Thakar, there are qualities to Melita's beautiful presenting, and she has another book we've talked about before, The Civilized Demons, Harappans in the Rig Veda. That somehow there was an Aryan invasion of ancient black-skinned India, and these white Aryan invaders reorganized these black Dravidians so that they now fit into a new master plan, the caste system, the Varnas. And at the top will be the Brahmins, who study all of what is left there for there to be studied, and who oversee the ceremonies that fructify and fortify the studying. And all of this is policed by the Kshatriyas, the warriors. In ancient Sanskrit, they're called Maruts. Indra, the chief thunder god like Zeus, has as his cohorts the Maruts, the warriors, the Kshatriyas, whose gleaming bronze spears and bronze helmets, shields, gold-encased armors, harnesses to their horses in tandem on their chariots, like a early civilized panzer division. Unstoppable. All this is a fiction. It did not happen that way at all. The black Indians, the Dravidians, were enormously civilized. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were cities of hundreds of thousands of people at the time that the Great Pyramids were being built in Egypt. There were no cities anywhere in the world that large. And not just that pair, like a New York, Los Angeles, but there were about 100 other Indus civilization, small cities up to medium-sized cities, and then these two huge metropolitan areas. They reached an apex of their capacities 1,000 years before the so-called 1500 BC Aryan so-called invasion. The original language of Sanskrit, which was also the original language of Old Irani, was Avesta. And the Avestan word Arya meant noble, those who are noble. And that quality of written language first occurred in Zarathustra's Gathas, about 1900 BC, about the same time that Abraham was getting the vision of leaving the ancient grounds, not just Ur, but where his father Terah had moved them to Haran in northern, what is today Iraq, near the Turkey border, near and in what really is Kurdish lands. The large city for Kurds is Diyarbakir in Turkey, but not allowed to be Kurdish, just like the Kurds in Iran are not allowed to be Kurds. The Kurds in Iraq are not allowed to be Kurds. That's where Abraham grew into maturity, not in Ur, but in Haran, and had the vision of the promised land there about the same time that Zarathustra was writing the Gathas. And in the Gathas, Arya in Avestan means noble. In particular, it is the noble men and women who are the angels of the presence. The phrase that comes down and becomes typical because it is a masculine phrase of order. The man of light. The man of light embodies the divine and speaks only in a very high dharma, poetic, who cannot be heard by the men of action, the ones who get things done, the ones who control the getting of things done. So that the interface threshold are the Arya, the men and women who are the noble companions, the noble friends. They're friends in the language of someone like a Vimala, the Sakar. They are the quality of the blossoms of friendship that come into play. They are not the warriors. They're not the Arya. And they don't invade. Like an angel of the presence, they are a openness. And it's the openness that is the conduit between the man of light and the men of action. Between someone who is divinely present in their presence and the world of doing to see that this occurs, that this happens. And the interface is this communion of friendship. The first people in the United States, in what is glibly called America still, because the United States is much broader than America, than the Americas even. The first men and women to understand this high Dharma quality of friendship are called the Transcendentalists. Yeah. Emerson and Thoreau, Bronson Alcott, Orestes Bronson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, but especially the women, Margaret Fuller, Louisa May Alcott, and many of them, the quality that was there. Emerson's Aunt Lydia was the influence on him far beyond any masculine influence. Mary Moody Emerson was fantastically brilliant. It is the friendship of the Transcendentalists that gave them the quality of being an interface between the original visioning of what the United States was going to be in the future, not established by the Revolutionary War, not codified by the Constitution, envisioned first by a proverbial man of light, Benjamin Franklin, who proverbially was the first to be able to put a hand out and, as the French used to say in their language, snatch lightning from the sky and use it to put out the torches and to shatter the scepters of those in power who think that they control. When Lord Clark made his Civilization series, it was a smash hit in 1969, after 3 years of preparation. He got permission from a new head of programming at the BBC in London, young then, David Attenborough, whose brother Richard Attenborough, a very famous actor, and became a great director because he directed the great epic film Gandhi, among other things. But David was the one who was interested in expanding the humanity of television, and he commissioned the 13-part series on civilization by Lord Clark, of Civilization, a Personal View of Lord Clark. And it was magnificent. I remember when I was hired to go to Canada in the spring of 1970, they were oil-rich, the white sheiks of Western Canada and Alberta, Calgary. Calgary, the home of the head office of 400 different oil companies. It was like the Dubai of its day. They gave me a budget of $90,000 a year to design an interdisciplinary series of programs. And my budget, beginning budget in 1970 was $90,000 just to buy things and refurbish things, travel and so forth. The first thing I did is I bought the Civilization series that was still on reels, 13 reels. It was $6,000 in 1970 money. It was a lot of money. All kinds of poo-pooing from the faculty saying, here's the San Francisco hotshot, spending our Canadian money like it was water, like some drunk sailor. And I said, wait till you come to the party before you criticize. And within a couple of months after they had seen it, they began showing sections of Civilization to all their courses. And everyone said, well, it was a lucky guess, wasn't it? Yeah. When it comes to the apex of discussion of the American genius, he waxes fondly on some of the origins in France of Voltaire. He goes on for long minutes, 20 minutes on Voltaire and how he went to Ferney on the border of France and Switzerland so that if anybody came to arrest him, he could walk over the border. He never once mentions the woman who owned Ferney, whose house it was, Madame de Châtelet. And that the 12 or 20 years that Voltaire spent with Madame de Châtelet, she was translating Newton into French, and so brought Voltaire out of his masculine arrogance that he was able to write Candide about Leibniz, the competitor to Newton. Leibniz in Candide, and made Voltaire a household word, and almost nobody here now knows that it was Madame de Châtelet who was the wise woman. Then he goes into Thomas Jefferson. Monticello, yes, his architecture is like Palladio in my favorite country, Italy, because the church is in Italy, in Rome, the Vatican, and all of these things. He never once mentions Benjamin Franklin. Why do you think that Benjamin Franklin is dating Madame de Châtelet and that there's somehow the hanky-panky going on here? Civilization? Stay tuned because the revisions are going to be huge. More next week.